Welcome to Character Analysis, the podcast where I play internet detective and armchair psychologist to help you identify red flags, avoid internet douchebags, navigate tricky social situations, and where I analyze human behavior in real life and pop culture. If you read the Substack post that introduces this episode, then you know that the title for today's episode is or has to do with emotionally slutty men. I want to talk about how we can avoid these types of men, especially if you're someone who might be chronically online or online enough or a lover of social media, because these types of men are all over these platforms. So I want to go over how to avoid being sucked into their webs because some of them, I believe, are very emotionally dangerous. But I also want to talk about the origin of emotionally slutty. If you've listened to me for however long, you know that I'm a Gen Xer. I really loved Sex in the City. I think there's been a lot of cultural and sort of dating influence from the show, and I often try to tie topics into pop culture moments. So let's first talk about the concept of what emotionally slutty means. Now, this comes from I would have to say I think it's my favorite Sex and the City episode about the Zaza Zoo, where Carrie is invited to the wedding in the Hamptons by a guy that she thought was gay, but he's married to a woman and she's a sex columnist, but apparently the concept of sexual fluidity is just lost on her. And she runs into her crush, Jack Berger. And Jack and Carrie have this sort of like makeshift date on the lawn of this Hamptons house, and they both start talking about their recent breakups. Now, Jack is kind of like a lot of men. He's not giving a lot up, whereas Carrie, she's talking because she's nervous. And this is sometimes when we become emotionally slutty. So she starts going into maybe a little bit too much detail about her breakup with Aiden, and Jack Berger seems to get overwhelmed, and he gets up and he leaves and he ends the little date very abruptly. Carrie, of course, gets embarrassed. She goes back. She's talking to Samantha, and she said, I revealed too much too soon. I was emotionally slutty." And I think sort of in the eye of the beholder whether or not she was. What was clear that, of course, we didn't see then was at the first sign of Carrie being emotional or not, or being complex or being layered and talking about emotions, Jack hightailed it out of there. Like Carrie being open emotionally very clearly freaked him out. And we should have seen that as a red flag, but of course, we put more of the blame on Carrie for being emotionally slutty. Now the thing about emotional sluttiness, right? It's I want to be clear that people understand that, that we're not talking about kind of inappropriate oversharing, right? Because that can be a product or trauma response. It can be a reaction to anxiety. It can be a byproduct of neurodivergence. So I want to make that distinction before we get too deep into this. What we're talking about here, especially with the idea of being emotionally slutty men, is when men use emotional availability and emotional intelligence as a way to manipulate women. My inspiration for this episode was he's a love guru type that I follow on a social media platform, and he's probably around my age, like 40s, 50s. Seems like I need to be clear. He seems like a nice person. He does not seem like a bad person. I don't think he's creepy or predatory in any way, but he definitely has made his his issues with intimacy, his issues with around attachment. He's definitely made them sort of part of his brand. And the thing there are a lot of things about this guy that just give me the ick. Again, there's nothing ostensibly wrong with this person. One of the things that gives me the ick is that if he were a woman and he were as oversharey as a woman that he is as a man, he would be labeled a train wreck. He would be judged. People would say, "How can you give dating advice when can't do this or that, or you have these issues?" A woman wouldn't get away with the level of transparency that this guy shows. And again, I will stress, I do not think that this person is predatory in any way. But I do think that creators like him, influencers like him, men on the internet like him, do they are sort of their vulnerability can be very performative, and what ends up happening is they end up cultivating this very large audience of women, usually single women, and the women end up performing all kinds of emotional labor for these guys to sort of help them through, or they become caretakers for these types of men, and that can go in different directions. The direction that I care most about, or that I find most concerning, is that a lot of times these women reach out to these men to kind of help them heal and provide all this kind of emotional labor, and they believe that they're building this kind of bond with the guy, and the guy is reciprocating to a point, right? And he's messaging them, and they talk on the phone and whatever, and they build this rapport and this relationship. But what they don't do is set boundaries, or if they do it in a way that's kind of hurtful and passive aggressive. To be clear, I don't know if, this particular creator that I'm talking about, I don't know that he does that. I've never heard any stories of him doing that, but I have heard stories of other men doing stuff like this, and it leading to a lot of women being very confused and feeling very manipulated, which they were. The other reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I've started using Threads more. You can follow me on Threads at the Kristen M, TheChristanM. I'm seeing a lot more people use social media as a substitute for a dating app. And you know what? I don't necessarily have a problem with that, only because there's far more transparency. You can see photos, you can get a sense of who they spend time with, and their interests and what they like or don't like. So I want to use this episode to help women who date men, or really anybody, because sometimes as women, we just want to help people. We want to take care of somebody. I want to make sure that that women do not get taken advantage of, and that they don't fall into a situation where A, they waste their time, and B, they incur or experience some kind of emotional damage. As I said in the Substack article, the real red flag, we'll call it, or the common trait among emotionally slutty men is that they overshare to to an uncomfortable degree. And this is where, I feel a little conflicted, because we want men who are emotionally attuned and emotionally intelligent. But I think it's worth discussing if there are some limits or some boundaries to that level of emotional vulnerability. We want men to be more self-aware, but we don't want them to weaponize that self-awareness against us. And since we're on the topic of self-awareness, this is the first red flag that women should be aware of. Because oftentimes we have a habit, unfortunately, of giving men points for things that they're supposed to do. And so we see a man who's self-aware, and we think that that somehow elevates him or separates him from other men. But what you have to look for is growth. Self-awareness without change is just a performance. It's not growth, that's, like, personal branding. One of the things about this creator that I talked about that inspired this whole episode, this is what I notice. I've been following him for at least a couple of years, and things just don't seem to have changed for him. Now, I'm not in his head. I don't know if he's done I don't know what kind of inner work he's done or, if he's I don't know where he is on his healing journey or his inner growth journey. But I know as someone who has paid pretty, I wouldn't say close attention, but pretty consistent attention over the years, I don't see much growth. And that's where I start to feel like, is this is this self-awareness and this vulnerability, is it authentic or is it sort of a marketing tool? The other red flag is something that I talked about when I spoke about dating influencer Danielle Walter, and it has to do with self-sabotage. Like I have said throughout this episode so far, we want men who are self-aware, who are emotionally intelligent, who are attuned. This creator was talking about his attachment wound, and which is I think it's great that he is aware of it, that he's talking about it. Maybe he's in therapy, I'm not quite sure. I think it's great that he's in touch with that. But I know that if I were just some random woman interested in dating him and I came across that video, I don't know that I would wanna take that on. I don't know that I would wanna know that about someone so early on, and it has nothing to do with him being a man. I wanna be clear about that. Like, I wanna get rid of, like, this isn't about what's masculine and what isn't. I'm more concerned with how much somebody would put out there, because if they're putting it out there for anybody, right? I've always said vulnerability is earned, and if they're just giving it away, then it loses its value. Now, if I had started dating somebody and over the course of getting to know each other, we started talking about these things, that's different because I've established a baseline with him and I can get a sense of, okay, I can assess the risk of this person, and they're talking about their attachment wounds or fears of abandonment, whatever it is. I've had some time to assess any potential risk, and I've gotten a sense of who this person is and what their level of emotional availability is. And I think those are the things, those are the we have to sort of hit those steps before someone can just, or we even can just, unload our baggage onto somebody. We saw it with Carrie and Berger, right? She just starts running at the mouth about her breakup, and he's kind of sitting there, and you can see the wheels turning in his head, and he's getting more and more panicked. And I think one of the things that he was panicked or could have been panicked about is, oh, this is someone who's very in touch with her feelings, and I'm really not, and she's going to want someone who is. And so, I think he got very overwhelmed and overstimulated very quickly. And that's something that we have to take into consideration. I've spoken of emotional consent before. Putting all these things out there without really asking somebody, "Hey, is this something that you're in the headspace to handle? Is this person who is oversharing to this degree, are they going to be safe for you?" That's something to consider. How much emotional how much emotional labor will be expected of you? Something else I always tell women to look out for, or tell people to look out for when it comes to these sort of emotionally slutty types of men is, does the conversation frequently revolve around him, right? Do you find yourself playing a role of nurturer to this person? How often are you being asked to prop somebody up? A lot of these types, a lot of emotionally slutty men are just men with a very deep-seated insecurity and need for validation from other women, and is that somebody you really wanna get involved with? I've always said I wouldn't date a male creator whose target audience is mostly women. You really wanna pay attention to how often this guy trauma dumps on you, and does he show concern for your own emotional well-being, or is it just, you know, I is it just him constantly talking about his past traumas? Because if that's the case, you have to wonder, uh, are they are they trying to sort of process things out loud, or are they just substituting their audience for a therapist? That processing of experiences, that's really key too. When they're talking about something, are they processing the experience? Are they processing their emotions? Or do you get the sense that they're performing them? And your gut will tell you, again, this is where our intuition comes in. Processing an experience usually involves introspection and like personal inventory. Someone processing their feelings, someone's processing an experience, they're gonna go back and they're gonna walk through it and they're going to examine it, hopefully objectively, and that objectivity too is what you wanna look for. If they're just cycling through emotions as they tell a story, they're not processing, they're performing. I brought the need for validation up a couple of minutes ago, but do they seem to always be looking for validation from women? We want men who have women friends, right? We want men who have platonic relationships with women. But is their social circle like almost exclusively women or way more women than men? That could be a problem. And if we're honest with ourselves, I think we feel the same way about women who are mainly or exclusively just friends with men. Like I think we call them pick-me's. Is this guy a male pick-me? That's what you have to ask yourself. Ask yourself, if this guy were a woman, would I call him a pick-me? And that's something else that'll help you tell or help you discern, is this someone who's authentically sharing, or is this someone who is using parasocial connections as a way, as sort of a business model. Else that's really important, you want to see that they demonstrate boundaries with the things that they share. Like, how personal do these guys get, especially when it comes to sex? Because as we get older, right? Like when we're younger, we talk more about our sex lives with our friends. But as we get older, especially when we get into relationships with people we really care about, we tend to keep that stuff closer to the vest. Unless, of course, there's an issue, and then, I would definitely want my friend to feel comfortable talking to me. But gratuitous talk about sex does not interest me as an adult. Something also that's really crucial, pay close attention to these men's to their social media and their comment section. Is it just a bunch of women, like, complimenting them, flirting with them, validating them? That's a pretty good sign that the guy might be a little emotionally slutty. Like I said, people are starting to use social media as a replacement for dating apps. These are the things that you need to be paying attention to. Timing is also something you need to look at. Are these men being emotionally vulnerable when they need something? Are they being emotionally vulnerable, if they're men online, if they're creators or influencers, are they doing it when engagement is low, or they're looking for followers, or they need to do something to spike engagement? That's another example of them being performative with their vulnerability. What I really want to make clear is that not every emotionally slutty guy is a bad guy, right? You we want somebody who's vulnerable. We want somebody who's emotionally attuned and intelligent. But you want them to be those things, where the emotional labor being performed is reciprocal. You want to see that they're self-aware enough to know when they might be crossing a boundary or when they might be being inappropriate. You want to see them set boundaries as well, not just for what they say, but with what people say to them. Do they show growth? Or do they just continue to repeat the same pattern over and over and over again? Do they do things that has not worked for them in the past, but they continue to do them? Do they demonstrate any kind of self-sabotage? That's when an emotionally slutty guy is going to drain you emotionally. To go back to Carrie and Berger for a second, Berger was the wounded philosopher. That's who I one of the categories in the post. He's that guy fresh off a breakup, but, you think he's really deep and insightful because he's a writer, right? He's a creative type, and creative types tend to be more in touch with their feelings. But really, he was just a guy who didn't know how to deal with his anger and who couldn't handle being with a woman who was more successful than him at that point in their life. Because remember, they both had books out, and his was underperforming, and hers, she's getting this big bonus and buying him shirts. And so I'm being clear. I don't think Berger was emotionally slutty at all. I think it was sort of the opposite. He was just a guy who didn't know how to deal with his feelings of hurt and disappointment and sadness after his breakup. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe and follow me at My Character Analysis on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also follow my personal Instagram page at TheChristanM, TheChristanM. I'm going to link to the new YouTube page in the episode description, and make sure you're subscribed to my Substack or my Patreon for the long form and subscriber only content. If you have a second, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Please share, like, and please rate us 5 stars on Spotify. I'll talk to you guys soon.